Good morning. Yeah, it works. Okay, welcome everyone to this first session of the conference. So happy to see familiar faces, colleagues, friends. So the International Anti-Corruption Conference this year has a theme called Confronting Global Threats, Standing Up for Integrity. So we have been facing a number of conversion crises in the past several years, as we all know, and we will be addressing those in the upcoming days. But we wanted to start off today on a positive note because anti-corruption fighters have no choice but to remain positive, diligent, persistent, to see the impact of our work. Because the fight against corruption requires many stars to align, a multi-sectoral and holistic approach, and it takes time to see change in cultures and mindsets and to achieve change when the ones who benefit from corruption do everything in their power to maintain the status quo. Hence, we need to celebrate our victories too. And last year was a great year for business integrity. Many milestones were reached, and we want to discuss these achievements, what has happened since, and where do we grow from here. So to provide some context and open the session, I would like to invite our first guest to the stage, Mr. Richard Nephew, Coordinator on Global Anti-Corruption of the U.S. Department of State of the USA.
Morning. I realize that yet again I'm wearing the same tie that's in my picture. I really need to mix it up when I travel. That is just a mistake that I keep making. Good morning, everyone. It's really great to be with you all here today at the 21st IACC conference and to have the privilege to welcome you to this session. I know that many of you in this room have been working on business integrity initiatives for many years, so you know the powerful results that we can achieve when the public and private sectors work together. Companies have a key role to play in holding each other and governments accountable. Multinationals have influence on companies in the markets they work in, large and small. They can apply positive peer pressure on other companies to operate with integrity to level the playing field for everyone. And of course, we have to acknowledge that corruption has a damaging impact on business. It distorts free and fair competition and exposes the private sector to legal, financial, and reputational harm, which then, of course, leads to an uneven playing field for businesses and workers, and everyone pays the price. In recognition of both the vital role of the private sector in preventing and countering corruption and the need to support businesses that act with integrity, the U.S. government, through the Strategy on Countering Corruption, has committed to bolster and promote public-private partnerships. Our vision is that by working with the private sector, the State Department can be more effective in making progress towards shared priorities of curbing bribery, creating a level playing field for businesses that operate with integrity, and holding bad actors who engage in corrupt practices accountable. While all governments acknowledge the role of the private sector in curbing corruption, we're increasingly recognizing the effectiveness of government incentives in promoting robust corporate compliance. In 2021, OECD anti-bribery recommendations provide good, practical guidance to establish effective internal controls, ethics, and compliance programs that also encourage countries to incentivize the private sector to put in place robust internal controls and compliance measures. This guidance underscores the pivotal role that governments play in ensuring that incentives are allocated judiciously, promoting a culture of corporate compliance that upholds integrity and transparency. I'd also like to acknowledge the first ever private sector forum held at the margins of the Conference of States Parties to the UN Convention Against Corruption in December 2023, where Resolution 10/12 on incentives for business integrity was adopted. And so I'm pleased to see this discussion continue today, and I hope that future conferences will also include private sector engagement of a similar character. I've also seen similar discussions to the State Department-funded global initiative to galvanize the private sector as partners in combating corruption, which is much more simply described as the GPS initiative. GPS is a platform for public-private dialogue and meaningful collective action on just those topics. One of the work streams of the GPS initiative is promoting corporate anti-corruption compliance through incentives and assessment. One of the key products from GPS's initial year is the updated resource guide on state measures for strengthening business integrity, which was released earlier this year. This guide, developed by the OECD in cooperation with UNODC and UN Global Compact, is designed to provide governments with a framework for identifying and implementing an appropriate mix of sanctions and incentives for encouraging business integrity. In today's workshop, I know that you may discuss the types of incentives or sanctions that are most effective in encouraging companies to invest in robust anti-corruption compliance programs. However, I hope you also discuss that for compliance incentives to be effective, governments and businesses need to have a shared understanding of what effective corporate anti-corruption measures and programs look like. Assessing the effectiveness of corporate anti-corruption efforts remains a challenge for both governments and companies. We need to continue our work to help governments and private sector practitioners identify good practices to measure effective anti-corruption compliance. As demonstrated through our collective efforts, collaborative approach among public sector and private stakeholders increases the collective impact and credibility of actions by both. In closing, I would like to encourage everyone in this room to actively engage, share insights, and contribute to the discussion ahead. My team and I are excited to be leading an effort to revitalize the Department of State's engagement with the private sector on anti-corruption and integrity issues. And of course, please feel free to connect with me and Shruti Shah on my team throughout this week. We want to hear from you and we want to stay connected to you. This is an opportunity to shape a conversation that will help cultivate a business environment where integrity is the norm and ethical conduct is not merely a compliance requirement, but a guiding principle ingrained in the fabric of corporate culture. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Nephew, for this comprehensive overview. So 3 things: a global call to action from business to governments. Second, the first ever private sector forum inside an anti-corruption COP. And third, a resolution on incentives for business integrity committing 190 governments to take action. It all sounds fantastic, last year's achievements, maybe a bit abstract, maybe a bit up there. So it's only been 6 months, but we want to know exactly how these international initiatives translate into reality and concrete impact at the regional and national levels. So for this purpose, let's welcome to the stage Ms. Brigitte Strobel-Shaw, Chief of Corruption and Economic Crime Branch of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, our keynote speaker of the session, who will give us some examples of actions that have been taken so far to move from commitment to practice.
Thank you, Christina, and a warm welcome also from UNODC. I would like to take a few minutes, rather than giving a keynote speech to brief you a little bit of what we have been doing since the conference adopted Resolution 1012 on incentives for business integrity, and to respond to the call to action from companies to governments on the occasion of the UNCAC at 20 celebrations. We've initiated efforts on 3 levels: global, regional, and national. On the global level, we have released a new publication, a resource guide on state measures for strengthening business integrity. Richard already mentioned this joint UNODC, UN Global Compact, and OECD document, which provides case studies and examples from different regions and sectors and really speaks to the global applicability of incentives. Also on the global level, we have formed a working group, or as we call it, a think lab, with about 25 companies to revise the 2013 publication, An Anti-Corruption Ethics and Compliance Program for Business, a practical guide. This guide is instrumental in offering businesses the necessary guidance to establish and implement effective anti-corruption programs, and it can also serve as a benchmark for states to incentivize companies that adhere to these standards. The publication is primarily addressed to companies and therefore nicely complements the resource guide for state measures that was released this year. On the regional level, we are integrating business integrity in the work of our UNODC anti-corruption hubs and platforms. Just last month, the Conference of the Eastern African Platform to fast-track UNCAC implementation for the first time included a dedicated private sector workstream. The resulting roadmap, co-developed by public and private sector stakeholders, endorsed some key work elements, such as promoting collective action, implementing incentives for business integrity, and strengthening anti-corruption legal frameworks. On the national level, UNODC and UN Global Compact are actively supporting stakeholders from the public and private sectors to draft a new anti-corruption law in Uruguay to sustainably strengthen business integrity, and are planning to also extend support to Kenya. As we continue to build on these efforts, we also recognize that there's still a long way to go and so much work to be done. Together, we are forging a path towards a more transparent, accountable, and ethical business environment. Let's start today with the following discussion on Business Integrity 2.0, and I very much look forward to the panelists today.
Thank you, Ms. Troubleshaw, for setting the scene. So as we get ready to discuss where do we go from now, with our four panelists who will bring to the table the perspectives of business, of civil society, and of government. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. Alexei Daneyko, Vice President, Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer of Lundbeck, Denmark. Mr. Soji Apampa, CEO and founder of the Convention of Business Integrity Nigeria. Dr. Silvina Basigalupo, criminal law professor, chair of TI Spain and TI International board member. And Mr. Jackson Mew, director of field services and coordination of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission of Kenya.
You will to say yeah.
Hello? Yeah, it works. Okay, so let's get started. Maybe I should explain what the UN Global Compact is for those of you who might not know. As I am the head of governance and anti-corruption of this organization. So the UN Global Compact is the UN office that works with the private sector in a nutshell. It is the largest corporate sustainability initiative in the world, committing companies to higher standards in the field of human rights, labor, and environment. And concretely, we have 10 principles, one of them on anti-corruption, that requires that our companies tackle corruption internally, externally, and collectively. So to start off, Mr. Soji Opampa, what does business integrity mean, and what makes it crucial for the anti-corruption movement? Can you please give us some examples of what companies, what measures they can take to tackle corruption and enhance business integrity?
Okay, thank you very much. Put very simply, business integrity involves all of those things you do consistently to make sure that you're doing the right thing and you're doing things right. Just those two elements, doing the right things and doing things right consistently, is what business integrity is all about. Without business integrity, it is easy to subvert development in a country like mine. I'm from Nigeria, and a lot of the corruption that goes on is on the interface between public and private sector and goes out through procurement. So if business is not consistently doing the right thing, you will lose a lot of national resources, and you'll be derailed from development as a result of it, for instance. In a place like Nigeria, we have the largest out-of-school children. We also have the largest concentration of children who are malnourished. Again, it's been very difficult for government to do the right thing because in the end, it does it through private sector. And if private sector doesn't embrace business integrity, we continue to have these negative developmental statistics in a place like that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Can you give us maybe some examples of measures? Because earlier, Mr. Nephew was talking about the importance of incentivizing business integrity, but then the clarity to know what type of measures can companies take, maybe.
Okay, very concretely, internally, the first thing is risk. Where is my risk in terms of dealing on business integrity? You have the UK Bribery Act, for instance, that says failure to prevent bribery is an offense. So private sector then thinks, okay, so where's the risk? Where do I have the least ability to prevent bribery? And so they have to understand the risks, first thing. Second thing is prevention. As much as possible, because private sector doesn't quite have the power of coercion that the public sector has, then they have to try to prevent rather than correct down the road. So the tone at the top from the CEOs, the training, the policies and procedures, the checking and double checking, and so on, has to be in place. And finally, detection. You have to be able to put things in place to detect if things are not going according to course, so you can intervene as quickly as possible and respond adequately. So these are some of the things internally that private sector has to do, and I'm not looking at externally, because in countries like mine, sometimes the external action is weak. And it really depends on that internal action from the private sector, which is why incentives then become key. That why should I bother when everyone else seems to be doing the wrong thing and getting away with it? Then really, why should I bother? Should I say because of things that are external to our geography that may catch up with me or may never catch up with me? Is that why I should do it? But there has to be a differentiator between a company that's putting in the energy to do the right thing and do things right and those who don't care. There must be something in it for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and we are going to talk about that, both the external action and the incentives. But first, you mentioned something important about embracing that business integrity. And I want to ask, Alexei, in your opinion, what seems to be the most pressing challenges that business face today in maintaining integrity or in developing, implementing integrity, and what potential solutions or opportunities they can seize to overcome those challenges?
Thank you very much, Christina. And it's a privilege to be here alongside such distinguished opinion leaders. I think one of the challenges is that we are all in transition. So compliance is obviously, it's a cost, and it can be costly. At the same time, citing the former US Deputy Attorney General, if you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance. And I think in this particular journey, in this transition, what we've seen is a couple of approaches from the authorities. I apologize, English is not my primary language. I would just call it enforcement and reinforcement, where enforcement is very much about the sanctions and the penalties, and the reinforcement, think about positive reinforcement. That's very much about incentivizing the business and good behavior. Some of what we've seen also from the business is we've seen some great developments, but we clearly still see a lot more of enforcement rather than reinforcement. Another challenge, which is also an opportunity, is people, and what you just mentioned, doing the right thing. I think this is extremely important for us in the companies. But we also realize that working across the geographies, we are dealing with a lot of people in multinational organizations, and they may have their own opinion based on their cultural background, professional background, of what doing the right thing means for them. So we, as much as we would like to drive some of those principle-based approach, we also need to establish the rules as well to make sure that we are on the same page for the critical areas. We've seen some great developments. We also seen that if there is anything that as a Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer that I wish is, of course, when there is an enforcement, I also believe enforcement is extremely needed, that there is a common understanding with the governments that a couple of bad apples does not necessarily need us to discard the entire fruit basket. From the reinforcement perspective, I would just like to see more of it, the positive reinforcement and incentives. And also, we've also seen some great initiatives, especially in public procurement, where an existence of the compliance program is a prerequisite for the company to take part in public tender in the first place. And I think that also drives compliance.
Excellent, thank you so much. And speaking of incentives, okay, we've mentioned now several times the resolution that was adopted at the Conference of the State Parties in December in response to the call to action, which committed 190 governments to implement incentives for business integrity. So for Silvina, I have a question that comes up all the time when we speak about incentives. And it's, why should business integrity be incentivized in the first place? Because, in other words, why should incentives be provided for a conduct that is expected from companies in the first place? Isn't it like, or you know, counterproductive? And how do incentives play into the equation of business integrity?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for given me the opportunity to be in this session. And I would like also to welcome all the assistants, because at the first moment it's to see that this matters, that you are also aware of the same topics we are aware of. So this is very good to see that we are not alone in this point. Well, as a criminal lawyer, I would like to introduce the point that, you know, all sanction systems operates with coercion or intimidation, but also with incentives. And this is, we don't call it technically incentives, we call it causes that mitigate or exclude guilt. So it's part of the sanctioning system that if someone is guilty, you may have the opportunity in some situations to have done before things that could mitigate your guilt or even exclude the guilt of your behavior. In the case of criminal liability of corporations, this was introduced in Europe in, let's say, more part of the countries. Criminal systems have chosen to give a great weight to compliance and integrity programs to prevent and reduce criminal risk. Or you talk about risk, now we are talking about criminal risk in doing business, so mostly on criminal offenses of corruption. So this means this is one of the biggest points to really assure that you can prevent corruption. If you look to the UN Convention or to the OECD Convention, we really need to tackle corruption by prevention. We cannot come when the corruption has done. We cannot repair anything. We should really work with prevention. And this is the same way we should work from the private sector and from the companies. So we don't have in European law the possibility that self-reporting and collaboration with investigation causes may be excluding liability. This is something very important because this is the moment with you can reduce sanctions, but it's not an incentive to prevent. It's just, well, okay, you have done something better after it, you have self-reported, but this will only allow to reduce this. And this is because of our criminal law procedure rules that we don't have really principle of opportunity. So excluding liability must be done for to prevent that something happens. It's not to reduce the risk. It's not that business is called to eliminate risk, because this is impossible. Risk zero doesn't exist. You will every time handle in a society with so many, in a risk society, we are handling every day with risk. It's just that we need to reduce, to mitigate, and we are, in this sense, this is something that business can really go ahead. And we should also, I think, reflect on the philosophy behind the incentives. They normally, when we think about incentives, they normally reward extraordinary actions. That means you have done something particularly good. So we are going to reward it. And I think the only way to exclude this kind of penalties is by promoting due action. That means I don't want you to reward for something that you did after you did something bad. We want you to grant and exclude penalty if you really are doing due actions. And this is the way to prevent. We need to prevent improving due actions. And this is having implemented and executed an adequate compliance and integrity program and that reduces risk. So the idea might be more placed right now not only on enforcement, as you told, so on this reinforcement. How can we reinforce by promoting our due action that will really guarantee that we will be sure to have not be liable for, so if you did it good, it may happen something. Of course, it can happen. This doesn't mean that that having a good program, integrity and compliance program, means never having an accident. You may have an accident, but if you have done everything well before to prevent it, normally it must be because someone of the organization, it's not the culture of the organization, but someone went on another path. And this is what we should prevent. That this is the risk that we have to reduce. So I think incentives produces proactive approach to prevent corruption and must be linked also to assess corporate compliance for granting incentives. So, and this is the way we do it through Transparency International in our business integrity fora, how we work with private sector. And I would like to invite you all to the session we have this afternoon, where we will be exponing also our way to work. So I hope this is our goal, to prevent corruption by promoting due actions.
Thank you, Silvina. And I see that from our private sector panelists, you're nodding your heads like you want to say something. So maybe I will extend this question to you both, Soji and Alexei. What do you think about this? Like, why should we incentivize a conduct that is expected from business? Because earlier you also said those companies who go the extra mile, they deserve to be recognized. Maybe?
You know, earlier this morning I've seen this app saying, "Good morning, corruption fighters." And I think this is also realizing that we are in this together. I also agree very much to what you mentioned. Well, of course, I'm not speaking about organized crime, but in multinational companies, corruption is very often a choice of individuals. And this is where, as companies, we are transitioning from being an enabler and business partner into much more of safeguarding the business and safeguarding the societies. This is why we have monitoring programs, auditing, compliance investigations, and so forth. At the same time, we also see that generally the self-disclosure is the choice of the company. And what I would like to see much more is because of this risk, I wouldn't say retaliation, but this risk of consequences, some companies choose not to disclose. So ultimately, I would rather much like to see much more of transparency, much less of fear of being open and transparent about the consequences, but much more of transparency so we can actually fight corruption in all its forms. So from my perspective, incentivizing the good behavior is absolutely critical.
Okay. Yeah, the phrase that you used on due actions could be a little deceptive because people just think it's one action that is involved, and it's the same action that everybody has. So some companies do a lot of due actions to prevent, and those due actions cost a lot of money. So is there something in return? Because it is really going over and beyond in order to prevent. So how prevented is your prevention action? For instance, how much have you prevented? How long is a piece of string? So a company that keeps doing more and more to prevent, you need to encourage them. Otherwise, people will do the minimum and there will always be issues. So sometimes incentives would be the way to dangle a carrot and encourage a lot more action beyond law, and get people to do those things. So I think that this is part of the argument why we should have incentives.
Yes, I agree with you. And did you want to add something, Silvina? Because you're looking at me.
You know, I agree with you, but you know, the price for the big incentive for business is changing the culture of the corporations. It's not just to have a carrot, it's just to be really convinced and have the compromise of doing integrity business. And this should be something that the leaders of the companies really try to change. If we only think about going ahead with business integrity, where we every time need to have a carrot because it's really expensive to prevent risks, but you have a lot of risk in companies. You have your investment risk, you have your business risk, you're dealing every time with risk. But you know, not being liable for wrongdoing business is something that must be in the core of a company as a culture. And this is corporate culture. And this is something that should be really improved in companies. And this should be really the great incentive. I want to have a different corporate culture. And this will really give a lot of benefits back. But it's untouchable right now. And this is something that I think private sector will really combine with me, that this is a hard work to do. Changing cultures in society, it's very difficult and it's very slow. It's very slow. But you, at the end, as a good person, as individuals, we do know if we want to do good or if we are going to do bad, if we want to be conflictive or we want not to do it. And this is how you define yourself. Now we have a great goal, defining corporate culture and the culture of all the individuals that are in the company, that really feel sure working in that company because we are really doing good. I don't know if my company, where I work in, will have any economic returns from it. But is this what promotes me to do it, to have integrity in doing my work?
Well, that's the great question and debate. That's why I wanted to raise this question, because it always comes up. We need a right mix of incentives and sanctions to do the right thing, or to go the extra mile, I would say, like it was raised here. So let's go to the government now. I heard that we are all in this together. Corruption cannot be tackled alone, and it's true. So maybe by getting input from the private sector for the development, adoption, and implementation of incentives, governments could be better equipped to know what works, what doesn't work, and also it can create a sense of ownership if business were part of the drafting, those incentives, of that development, and that will always facilitate the implementation phase, right? So, Mr. Mew, could you give us some concrete examples of collective action initiatives in Kenya where the voice of business has been included in the formulation of anti-corruption policies and legal frameworks?
Thank you for that question. Just before I tackle the question, allow me just to say I work for the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission in Kenya. And prior to the year 2018, most of the anti-corruption interventions in Kenya were mainly focused on public officials. They only would touch on the private sector and businesses where there was direct contact between public officials and private persons or companies. With that experience, it proved that there was need for more involvement of the business entities in the fight against corruption. Because we look at it in Kenya, businesses as the supply side of corruption. And that being the case, there was need to have a more organized mechanism to bring businesses and promote integrity in businesses so that we can have some kind of internal self-regulations by the businesses which will reduce instances of corruption. With that, initiatives came up. It was agreed without a proper framework of interaction between the private sector and public sector, then it would be very difficult. In fact, in situations where even law enforcement actions were taken on public officials, there was need at times to get witnesses from the private sector. And because prior to 2018, the private sector did not feel as if they were so much part of the fight against corruption, then even supporting cases in court as witnesses used to face challenges, because the private sector will feel by supporting such law enforcement actions, they were draining on their resources and they were not directly benefiting as private sector. So because of that, there was collective action which was initiated. And in Kenya, we developed what we call the National Ethics and Anti-Corruption Policy in 2018. In this policy, which came as sessional paper number 2 of Kenya, there was involvement of both the government and the private sector. The private sector contributed in what they would require government to do to provide an enabling environment for the private sector to do business. So this was the first major action point in which the private sector provided proactive actions and recommendations to promote business integrity. So that was one of them. So we have the National Ethics and Anti-Corruption Policy in Kenya, which was developed jointly by the public and private sector. After that, the policy came into effect, there was need to have more specific mechanisms to operationalize the policy. And again, it was very interesting. The business community had become very proactive because they used to lose a lot of money on corruption and bribery. And the private sector initiated an initiative to develop the current Anti-Bribery Act in Kenya. The Anti-Bribery Act of 2018 in Kenya was initiated by the private sector. Once it was initiated, the public sector was able to join, and it was developed. And this Bribery Act provides clear mechanisms on what the role of the private sector and the public sector is in preventing bribery in business, which used to affect the business environment. This has worked very well. And further to make it much better, jointly between the public and the private sector, now we have regulations which have again been developed for further implementing the Anti-Bribery Act. This again was a collective action initiative between the public and the private sector. The regulations now are very clear. They provide obligations to both public and the private sector on what you need to do to prevent bribery in your institutions, and how to prevent bribery when you are interacting with public institutions as private sector. These steps have bolstered the fight against corruption in Kenya, and we have seen more successful even prosecution of bribery cases in Kenya since this collective action was initiated between the public and private sector. Beyond that, there was need also to involve the wider public in preventing bribery and corruption in Kenya. And through that, the various sectors, the business community and the private sector playing a critical role, we came up with what we call the Kenya Integrity Forum. This Kenya Integrity Forum brings together various stakeholders in Kenya: government, the civil society, the business community, and everybody together, the youth and everybody. They are able to come together and discuss proactive mechanisms to fight corruption in Kenya. To be able to have structured engagements for the various sectors, we developed what we call the Kenya Integrity Plan. The Kenya Integrity Plan provides mechanisms for the public sector, for the private sector, for the business community, for the development partners. Each and every sector has its own objective provided under one plan. And this helps in coordinating the interventions to prevent corruption and bribery. This is aimed at improving the business environment in Kenya. These are some of the examples in which the private sector has been able to work with the public sector to come up with joint action plans which are owned by both sectors for purposes of coming up with a better business environment, which helps the businesses to have a conducive environment, to thrive in your businesses with little cost arising from bribery and corruption, which initially was mainly perpetuated by public officials who used to demand bribes. Through the regulations and the Bribery Act, now it is very clear on how businesses are able to report on instances of bribery, how they support law enforcement for bribery cases, and therefore it becomes a lot more easy to deal with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really like to hear those success stories because it's not easy to bring governments, private sector, civil sector, everybody together. Although we know that it's needed, it's necessary, we need to build trust. And that is the challenge number one when we implement collective action initiatives around the world. And just like we have done in Kenya through our Global Compact network there, we're also working in another 19 countries. So the UN Global Compact, so you all know, we have country networks in 60 countries at the moment. And thanks to some projects like the Siemens Integrity Initiative and the GPS, we have the funds and the partners like UNODC to promote this kind of collective action at the national level between governments and private sector to be able to develop legislation, policies, and to implement them. And last month, something really wonderful happened in Eastern Africa. Brigitte mentioned it at the beginning. So UNODC has these regional platforms around the world to fast-track the implementation of the UN Convention Against Corruption. And some of these platforms, they have identified anti-corruption in the private sector as one priority topic to tackle. These regional platforms, typically, they focus on 4 selected topics, which could be whistleblower protection, public procurement, etc., where they have to really emphasize their efforts. And for the first time last month, we went to Nairobi, Kenya, for this Eastern platform that had identified private sector anti-corruption as one of the priorities. And we brought like 25 business people who drafted alongside public officials a roadmap of concrete actions to take forward in the entire region. So that was a huge success, and I hope that we will be able to do that in other regional platforms, because that is how we translate that commitment we said at the beginning from international or global level to regional and then to practice in countries. So what now? Let's look towards the future, because we have discussed what happened last year, what we're doing right now, incentives, business integrity. But we are on the road to the next conference of state parties, which will happen next year in Qatar. So how do we keep momentum is what I want to know. The theme of the first private sector forum inside a COSP last year was Uniting Leaders for Business Integrity. It was very broad, also because it was the anniversary of the convention. But I want to ask you now, my panelists, what theme would you give the next private sector forum? Because we have to make sure that this happens at every COSP. And what priorities would you include in that agenda? And I want to hear the perspective from the private sector, from civil society, and from government to see if we're all on the same page. So let's start maybe with Soji. What do you think?
Okay, thank you. And perhaps I'll start off from where our debate ended. Because, again, if you have private sector, particularly the large private sector from Europe, the multinational companies, they have what you're talking about, this ambition to make it the life and soul of the culture of the organization. But we see what they do on the ground. Very different to what they're talking about in head office. So how do we get this integration? We need this, particularly in zones of weak governance, because it's not government that is requiring the business ethics, unlike in their home governments, where there is pressure on them. It's not the same pressure when they're operating in zones of weak governance. So if we really need to close it up, we need truly joined up collective action. Not only collective action at the head office level, but even on the ground in those zones of weak governance. So I would really like to see a world in which we acknowledge that it's a bit of window dressing in these zones of weak governance, and we address it. What do we really need to do on the ground in places like Nigeria to get real business integrity that we will be proud of, being a company from an OECD country, for instance? How do we get that to marry together? That's what I'd like to see. Thank you.
Thank you. So what would be the theme, the title?
For me, it's not just collective action, it's integrating our collective action. You know, so it's north, south, east, west, making sure it's fully integrated and it has some greater authenticity to it. Yes.
Excellent. Okay, let's hear from civil society then, Silvina, as we continue the debate.
Well, I continue with your point because I agree fully with you. And I think the next topic should be to think integrity beyond compliance. That means go ahead with how we go now on the floor, as you said, how we can contribute from civil society in collective actions like we do with integrity pacts, white lists. That means now we need to come ahead because on particularly the problem that you pointed out, it's what is on the ground. And this is something that we will only see if we do have these collective actions. For instance, I think integrity pacts have been working very good in those places where we have implemented them, you may have a good example in TI Bulgaria, where they really introduced this integrity pacts with the government working together and having this white list of businesses that are on the right way, not only on the paper, by doing the right things. So I really think our next step should be integrity beyond compliance, so that we really think big about what does really integrity means. It's not only that we are right with compliance programs, that we have all our programs in place, that we are really doing this information. What next step is really working on integrity. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. And from government, Jackson, what title would you give it?
Thank you for that question. When you look at the background I provided in terms of the interventions Kenya has had, it starts to suggest that self-regulation is the most effective. There will be no time when we are going to reduce corruption in businesses because of law enforcement by government. Corruption and bribery is going to be mitigated if, as businesses, we employ proactive strategies under our own self-regulations to mitigate against these challenges. And therefore, for us, the most effective tools will be tools which can be undertaken by the private sector itself. And because of this, I want to suggest that in the next round, we can have a theme which is focused on values, values-based approach for business integrity. Because when we have values, every business entity will incorporate values in its systems which will prevent bribery and corruption. And that way, the challenge is mitigated because it will be an issue of self-regulations. So any initiatives which turns the obligation to self-regulate to the business community will be the most effective in the fight against corruption. So I'm looking at values-based approaches for business integrity. It will be much more effective than where government policies around the business environment for law enforcement. That is not effective. That is reactive. We need more proactive mechanisms with inbuilt systems by every business so that the challenges of bribery and corruption are mitigated at the entity level. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are some great ideas. And my last question would be for Alexei, although you're all welcome to respond. So last year, because it was the first private sector forum inside a conference of the state parties, we had a lot of awareness raising or case building to do in order to convince companies to come to the conference. Of course, for all of us corruption fighters, it's evident and maybe we don't see it, but it was hard. We had to explain, because companies, they always look for what's in it for me, you know? So, Alexei, what would you say to companies? Why are you here today, first? What is the importance of these conferences, and what would you say to companies to come and participate in these dialogues?
Thank you, Christina, and thank you all for such amazing topics. You really make it difficult choosing between the governance and the integrity beyond compliance and the values. I'm all in for all of this, so whatever you choose. I think one of the key things, again, stressing we are in this together, and private-public partnerships is the formula for the success in fighting the corruption, in my opinion. Also, in my opinion, when actually preparing for this session today, I went through a lot of materials. I went through call to action, the resolution 1012, the resource guide. And to my biggest shame, I also realized that despite working very actively with compliance and ethics, I was not aware of many of those great initiatives being in place. So this is on me. But I would also mention that communication is also the key forward. Making sure that we can promote what is being done, that we can communicate and let people know. Because ultimately, in this journey, companies drive impact, not suggesting the fourth alternative topic, but it's the impact very often beyond the geography and beyond our own business. Because we have, when it comes to compliance and ethics, we have impact towards our business partners within the value chain. We also driving corporate initiatives and global initiatives. It also very often goes beyond the geography because we apply the same standard in all countries where we operate. And to your question, what's in it for me? I think we are here to also realize that the world will move on. The society will move on. And for me, it's quite important to be in a co-driver seat. And maybe, if not co-driver, then a passenger, like in good old days where the passenger would be sitting next to the driver and, trying to interpret the paper maps before the navigation times. And this is the dialogue that we should be engaged. I would, as a private sector, I would not like to be running behind the car and trying to catch up. So for me, this is an important forum to make sure that the business opinions and voices heard, and we have co-ownership in creating this. Because I think the co-ownership or co-creation that actually strengthens accountability. Then it's not something that somebody else decided for us, it's something that we collectively decide.
Excellent. Silvina, I think you wanted to add something to that or not? Because I saw...
Great inputs from our colleagues. So.
Yes, so those are great ideas for the next COSP. And now I just received some questions from the audience for the Q&A. So I will open for anyone who wants to answer to the first one, which is, what are some measures? No. What was the measure that had impact on private sector corruption in your view? What was the measure that had impact? Oh?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Maybe the person who made that question can stand up and clarify it, or... Okay, what was the measure that had impact on private sector corruption in your view? Okay, maybe just initiatives or measures or that maybe governments can take to prevent, mitigate private sector corruption, in your view?
Thank you for that question. When I'm looking at measures that would motivate the private sector to engage in preventing corruption and bribery, we do appreciate that when we have these collective actions we are talking about, and we create a level playing field, it would be easy to manage malpractices such as a conflict of interest, which is mainly perpetuated by public officials. When some of those things are done, then it provides a better environment for the private sector and business entities to compete for business, which the private sector does with the government. Without a level playing field, you'll find some private sector organizations find it extremely difficult even to win business from government departments and ministries, because the award of these business opportunities is infiltrated by conflict of interest and other unethical considerations. So working together and leveling the playing field between the public and private sector will create a good business environment in which a business entity would be able to do business genuinely with the government, because award of business contracts and tenders will be based on suitability and competence to deliver on projects. When we do not have this environment level, it becomes very easy for companies, even without the required competence, winning big tenders with the government, which they are not able to implement. And once these tenders are won by companies which do not have competence to implement, of course, it turns to loss of public resources, because these projects will never be effectively implemented. The projects will be substandard. The projects at times will be overpriced, and this goes to affect the resources in the public sector for implementing projects. And the loser becomes the public, because these projects at times will stall, they will not be completed, or they will not be done to the required standards. But with a good business environment, you will get the most qualified business entities winning the right tenders, implementing them, and being able to prosper and bring profits to their shareholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I will ask the other panelists, if Silvina and then Soji.
If I should look at which was the breaking point on turning a different view on corruption from the business sector, this was the changing of paradigm that we went ahead after the OECD Convention and the UN Convention to give the possibility to implement the criminal liability of corporations. This was a breaking point. This was the moment where law, well, the law framework, or the framework of law is what changes behaviors. If we think of other different moments of changing behaviors in society, like non-smoking in a plane, non-smoking in a room, non-smoking in a plane, it changed behaviors. And I think the great breaking point is the changing of paradigm that in continental, at least at continental European traditions, we implemented criminal liability of corporations. This was a shock. If I look at the Spanish scenario, it was Christmas 2010. This was really a shock for business that we have a law right now implementing criminal liability of corporations. And this is due the work of the OECD and UN to come ahead with the convention. So to realize the states that they have to change the scenario.
Exactly, Article 43 of UNCAC. And many countries are still not there, but we're working on it. And the beauty is that we can actually do it through collective action. So some of the measures precisely that we've been discussing, collective action, incentives, are definitely impacting the private sector corruption. In fact, they were mentioned on the call to action that I have been mentioning several times now, the resolution, of course, and they are also priorities of the B20 Task Force on Integrity and Compliance this year, both collective action and incentives, also AI governance, ethical leadership. So, Soji, what do you want to add?
Yeah, what we've found is that, for example, the great work being done in Nigeria by the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network, you would find that when the private sector sees that it helps their core business is addressed, which speaks to the level playing field that Director of Ethics and Anti-Corruption was talking about, then people crowd in. So specifically in Nigeria, the actions were reducing the time it took for vessels to turn around and the costs of visiting. Then it was easier for many more to crowd in and for the private sector to actually encourage their own people not to, because there's the erroneous view that, oh, just pay your way and go, because they want to reduce time and they want to reduce overall cost. So if you already know what it is you should pay, you've limited it, which is a fallacy. But as soon as they see that there's a viable alternative to that, many more crowd into that. And I think it's the fact that it's not peripheral, it is central to their business, that it was easier for people to crowd in.
Exactly, is to find that win-win situation where everybody wants to work together. So I have another question here, maybe for Alexei, because this one is very private sector oriented. What information about compliance management system is most indicative of its effectiveness and that companies are not necessarily reporting at the moment, but could or should? So what information about, I guess, a compliance program is most indicative of its effectiveness?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
I would say it's the confidence of employees to report through the whistleblower hotline if they see anything wrong. Because I think it's quite, when everything is fine, we can speak about, ethics and the values, but then things happen in a particular country, geography, part of the business, and it's very important for employees and other whistleblowers to be able to actually feel confident that their case will be taken with all the care, all the seriousness by both internal and external parties. I think that's one of the matters. And another way is to see how effective is the compliance program is the tone at the top. Because the compliance program, we have training and communication, monitoring, we are having the compliance hotline, the due diligence, which is very important to also drive the understanding that it's not just us in our company, but it's also our business partners who represent us, that their ethical standards should be on the same level as ours. But the tone at the top, without it, without the ethical leadership, it just becomes pro forma. It just becomes a nice picture without the content. So ethical leadership and making the right decisions and doing things right and doing the right things on a daily basis, that's our formula of success, I would say.
Excellent. That was a great question and very good answer. Does anybody want to add something? How do you demonstrate ethical leadership? How can you?
Okay. I think ethical leadership has two dimensions. Number one is your ability to insist on doing the right thing by yourself. And secondly, ensuring that all those within your power, that you oversee, also do the right thing. And you can't divorce them. So it's showing the leadership by action, by example, as well as ensuring, not just insisting, ensuring that all those within your, under your authority do the right thing. And that is what would demonstrate the ethical leadership with time.
Yes. So allocating the right resources to the program also shows the really credibility and will behind the tone from the top. Okay, and the last question, how do you incentivize business integrity in cases of state capture where key business are part of or influence governments? How do you incentivize business integrity in cases of state capture where key business are part of or influence governments? Maybe for a question for governments first.
This is a question.
Thank you for that question. I want to believe it is the hardest since we started. How do we deal with the state capture? And even initially, how does state capture even occur? When you look at corruption, there are things you want to look at which will always characterize corruption. One will be the values of the people who are governed, whether they have such values which allow them to resist corruption. The other factor which you want to look at will be institutions which are set up by governments to deal with corruption. If you have effective institutions, issues of state capture may not arise. And what will manage or make it difficult for influential business entities to influence government decisions to the extent of state capture will be effective institutions, not individuals. Individuals can change. You can have good people. You can have ethical people. But governments exist in perpetuity. So at one time, you may have ethical leaders. After some time, that will change. When that changes, and you don't have people subscribing to similar standards of ethics, what will safeguard the business integrity and the public are institutions. And therefore, it is very important to have strong ethical institutions as a way of safeguarding against state capture. The other factor you want to look at, which plays a critical role in state capture, is the political culture of a country. What is the political culture in a country? If you have a political culture which allows political decisions to override statutory institutional decisions, weak institutions, then it becomes very easy for influential business entities to penetrate key actors in government. And that is what will result into state capture. Once the state has been captured, then it is the interest of those who influence government which takes precedence. Looking at priorities of a government, the priority of such business actors may not align with the priorities of a country. And therefore, you may find the country's resources country's development agenda is influenced in a certain direction because of state capture for purposes of providing extensive business opportunities to those who are captured. In the same arrangement, you'll find most leaders then, in a situation where you have state capture, most of them will even be brought to office or come to office under the influence of influential business entities. And for as long as the ethical compass of such business entities is not aligned to the general good, then you will have biased development, public resources will be utilized, but the general development of the country or benefits to the people may not be there. You will have a situation where you have extremely wealthy business people and the majority very poor people in a country. And immediately you have that kind of difference of people who are extremely wealthy and others who are very poor. Obviously, in such a country, you will experience issues related with insecurity, issues related to unfair business practices, and that way, then, the full impact in the fullness of time of state capture will be under development in that country, despite the fact that in the same country you have extremely wealthy, but very few business entities who control the businesses in that country. Those are some of the thoughts I have on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a hard question indeed, and I think we'll take one from the audience. Here I have two. Three. Oh my God, I have several. Okay, let's start in the back.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. My name is Khalid Bobshaid. I work with the Oversight and Anti-Corruption Authority from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And I actually have two questions, and I don't mean to make it pretty long. But the first one is for Dr. Silvina. I apologize, I'm not too good with names. But you had mentioned that it's slightly slow to change the culture, I guess, of looking at integrity and anti-corruption within the private sector. My question is, because since I work for a government authority, what could governments do more to help this culture of change come about? And I mean not just in the sense of policy development or incentives, but what could governments do to work with the private sector to kind of, speed up the process of the culture of change? My second question is for, I believe, Mr. Jackson. So you had mentioned the Kenya Integrity Forum, okay? My question is, what impact did this forum have, and what were the outcomes? Like, could you give us some examples of the outcomes that this forum brought about? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this is a lightning round, so answer in 1 minute each.
Yes. So thank you very much for your question. And when I said social changes are slow, are very slow if they only depend on the individual behavior. If it only depends on your self-improvement. But if you have the right legal framework, you push this behavior. The example that I put was the safety belt or with smoking. It was from one day to the other that you had to smoke outside. And I would suggest to thinking about public policies, that thinking about transparency and accountability as really a public policy that must be in place. This would push a lot to change behaviors and also to realize how important it is if you have these policies in place, having access to information, having a better field also for doing business, because you will have more information of what your competitors are doing. So this is important also for business too. So access to information, it's and transparency as a public policy should be really more improved.
Excellent. So again, the right balance of prevention, but also enforcement. Okay. And
thank you for that question, my colleague, on what could be cited as some of the impact of the Kenya Integrity Forum. As I said earlier, this forum brings together about 20 sectors. Among the 20 sectors, the private sector is one of the sectors. Through such an arrangement, an informal arrangement, you are able to bring all these sectors to sit together and discuss challenges affecting business and the challenges also affecting government. It was out of such an initiative that it was felt that the anti-corruption laws before 2016 put the burden of bribery only on public officials. And therefore, it was basically leaving the private sector out of that equation. And because of that, under that forum, the current Anti-Bribery Act was actually developed under that kind of arrangement. Of course, in the forum, we also have the legislature represented. So once the initiative came up from the private sector, it was picked by the relevant sectors within the forum, and it was developed, and it became law. We are seeing a great initiative through such a forum. We have situations because the business community is also represented there, the government is there, during project implementation by the government. You have the civil society as part of that forum. Monitoring of public project implementation has become easy because projects which are being implemented by government then can be monitored. And when during review meetings for this forum, then all these people are able to agree, they are able to discuss and identify areas where there are challenges, discuss and find amicable solutions. So these are some of the benefits which arise from the fact that all these sectors are able to come together under such an informal network, but which has a very clear plan of his actions, giving every player its obligations. That way, the collective good for all the players is taken care of because at least you have a platform in which you can meet informally and share challenges and best practices. That enhances accountability, it enhances integrity in business practices, and it also enhances the monitoring and evaluation of public projects. Thank you.
okay, I see that I have 48 seconds left, so we cannot take more questions, but there's a coffee break right after, so we can stay here and receive the questions that you may have. So I'll just conclude here saying that, of course, we discussed the resolution that was adopted on incentives, and that is a positive note to start on, but of course, there's so much work to be done. And so from UNODC and the UN Global Compact, we stand ready to support, to facilitate these collective action initiatives which we believe are making a difference around the world. And some really quick announcements. We have this session later on. This one at 5. We hope you can join us to deep dive on ESG and the integrity advantage of that. Next, please. This is a workshop, a webinar coming up. It's free, it's online, so here's the QR code if you're interested in joining. I know Alexei already touched on the topic of reporting channels and whistleblower protection, so there you have it. And finally, next week we will be at the Basel conference, which has an award for collective action initiatives, and the UN Global Compact Brazil has been nominated for 2 awards, so please vote for us. Those are the two: agribusiness, anti-corruption, collective action, and transparency, 100% movement. So I finish with that, and we stay here if we can for the questions that are still pending. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you to my panelists, and we hope to see you later.